My father was 32 when he died. My mama 33 when cancer claimed her. I was 8. My brother Kim was 6. Carol, our baby sister, had just turned 4. They called it cancer, but it weren't nothing but a broken heart, was the whisper that wafted with enough velocity above our heads during the aftermath of my mama's burial that it could have lifted my sister's bangs with the draft it left in its wake. We also had to endure a plethora of fat woman hugs. They enveloped us one by one, these women with the sagging folds of flesh and scratched our already ruddy faces with the black woolen dresses that they had in their closets since those days they had patterned their wardrobes after Mamie Eisenhower. They exuded an assortment of fragrances, gardenia, vanilla extract, hairspray, or Clorox, coffee, a bit of liquor, lemon pledge. The mere presence of Kevin, Kim, and Carol in a crowded room back then. KKK. Ain't it just precious? Was another whisper that always seemed to float about us. Could elicit tears from total strangers, as well as anything they had at the time in their pockets, or snappy patent leather purses, juicy fruit gum, a piece of old peppermint, loose change, a handkerchief to wipe our noses. I was given a rabbit's foot at my mother's wake by a very tall man who explained to me that he had played basketball with my daddy. You need this rabbit's foot. You need it more than me. Which one are you? Kim or Kevin? God knows you youngins need a string of good luck. You had a heap of bad. Too big a heap, God. Look at me. Here I go again. Fuck! At that, he began to cry. I ignored him and wondered what his new word was he had just uttered, because my Aunt Vina May, my grandmama's older sister, shuddered at the sound of it and abruptly pulled me toward her. She was standing nearby, pouring a bit of carnation evaporated milk into her coffee straight from its little can. I marveled at the word's power, as Aunt Vina May's fingers were actually trembling now with anger as she pressed me protectively against her raw silk dress. Its tiny nubs, rubbing up against my face. Aunt Vina May always wore a chunky necklace which would bang against her latest astonishing brooch when she moved about. She pulled me closer to her. I heard the agitated clunk of her jewelry above my head. The silk nubs burrowed into my cheek. Something had just happened. Something other than funerals and tears and the arrival of another plate of food to stick in the refrigerator. Fuck. I wanted to know a word like that. A word that could make something happen. One that could push death, if only momentarily, from such a room. The very tall man saying, sorry, ma'am, unfolded his body from its careful crouch next to me and walked away. I forced myself from Vina May's grasp. She sipped her carnation to coffee and assessed me with her stare, filtering me through all her meanness. Childless, Vina May flared whenever children were too long underfoot. That's just her nervous condition, my grandmother would diligently explain. The Venomous May was the name I ended up giving her when I was about 11. Little fuzz on my upper lip, with a wit that had just as shockingly reached its pubescence. My grandmother was the youngest of 9 children, 7 girls and 2 boys, and Vina Mae was the oldest sister nearest to her in age. They had grown up in the earliest part of the 20th century. My grandmama was born in 1904 without indoor plumbing. When nature called, we always had to head to the outhouse in pairs so that one sister could shoo away the chickens and roosters in case our bantam got inside the outhouse and pecked at our booties or other little private areas, my grandmother had once told me. Now, Vina Mae and me always made them bathroom runs together. You ain't never seen nobody that could shoo a chicken like Vina Mae. Oh, no, there's just a bond more than blood when you grow up with somebody that saves your little private parts from being pecked to death on a December morning. I sure felt like one of those turn-of-the-century chickens as I stood there waiting for Aunt Vina Mae to shoo me away with one of her mean-spirited remarks. I readied myself. My hands flew to my hips. Who would have thought that both Howard Jean and Nancy Carolyn dying would have straightened you out some? She finally said, calling my parents rather creepily by their given names while reaching up with her carnation hand to make sure her freshly rinsed, tightly teased curls were staying in place. You want some of this? She asked, waving the carnation evaporated milk at me. Here you go, tastes like candy, she said, handing me the little tin container of the syrupy white stuff. She grabbed my face too tightly in her free grip bracelets jangling under my chin. She moved in closer. You're pretty as a girl. She said, taunting me with a compliment, then letting go of my face as quickly as she had grabbed it. Joyce Otis, she called to my grandmother, keeping up her litany of given names. Anything I can do to help? Want me to cut up some more cake? I'd have brought my nigger gal down with me from the Neshoba County if I'd known it was going to be this busy. I frowned at the latest use of the N-word in front of me. Although as far as I could tell, it was uttered as often around these parts as phrases, Jesus is your Lord and Savior, and would you please pass the biscuits? Are they buttered? But I knew better, knew it ever since I'd used the word in Mattie Mae's presence months earlier on the morning after Sidney Poitier won Best Actor for Lily of the Fields. Mattie Mae was a maid. It was an old friend of my grandmother's. How I wish my grandmother would have let her help out that day like she had asked her to do when Mattie showed up to hug her neck and weep like a wet baby at the news of my mama's death. Oh, sugar, now we'll just cry too much if you're around, my grandmother told her. You come on over the next day and help me clean up all this mess. You can take home some leftovers. But if Mattie Mae were here, I kept thinking I have somebody to talk to. Her name became my mantra. Mattie Mae, Mattie Mae, Mattie Mae. As I tried to remain cool and collected, because truth be told, all I wanted to do was turn over all the tables of food. I wanted to pick a fight, do something more than pout. Mattie Mae, Mattie Mae, Mattie Mae. I gripped the rabbit's foot and felt its yellowed, intact claws dig into my palm as I surveyed the clacking throng that had gathered in my grandparents' tan-brick, flat-roofed, surprisingly modernist house way out here in the piney woods on a Mississippi dirt road. Its bright red front door perfectly matched the red berries that clung to the bushes and the flower beds that surrounded it. I looked around. I took a swig of carnation. I looked out at the dining room's picture window. Cars were now parked all along the dirt road sloping shoulder. There was no more room for any of the yard around the countless pine trees that shed their brown needles into a prickly fawn-colored carpet that completely covered the ground. The needles were great for making walls of forts, and I yearned at that very moment to build one that was impenetrable by all the incoming pity. The family's menfolk had gathered out there around the lawn chairs, the lace-like autumn shadows softening their faces as the sun filtered down through the bare, long-limbed pines. Two older male cousins tossed a brown pine cone back and forth with Kim, who pretended he was Charlie Conley, an old quarterback for the Ole Miss Rebels. Carol, always at Kim's heels, begged to toss the pine cone too. A few of the men were in that 1 foot on a fender stance that I always saw my uncles take when talking about deer hunting or Goldwater's loss, or all those outside commie agitators who seemed continuously to be invading our state through my childhood, especially during those compressed and awful months that joined 1963 to 1964. Those months when both my parents died, when JFK died, when Medgar Evers died, when those 3 civil rights kids, Swerner, Cheney, and Goodman, died up in venomous maze below in Neshoba County. I watched the breath from the men's mouths fog the chilly air with such conversation. A car radio was blaring the news that someone named Horace Barnett had confessed to the FBI about the murders of the 3 kids and was going to tell them exactly what took place back during the summer. Well, that was a summer when my mama was the sickest she'd ever been, while she lay up in a hospital, Lackey Memorial, which had been built to resemble rather visibly an antebellum mansion. As I walked out to the parking lot after visiting my weekend mama one particularly hot, sticky evening, my grandmother tried to explain how life was unfair at times. And we're not gonna tell Kim and Carol nothing. Only you, she said. We figured you're old enough to take it. You're certainly smart enough to understand the situation. You do understand. God just needs good people with him up in heaven, so he's calling your mama to be with your daddy. She's only got another month or so to live, sugar. God's calling her name. God knows what's best. He knows. Now you listen to me. You listen up. I'm more serious than I've ever been. Ever in my life. You've got to be a man about this. A little man. You can't be no child no more. That'll suit you right fine, won't it? You just never seem to like being one anyway. We reached the car. A black tank-like 57 Buick, all grill work and hubcaps and headlights the size of Cyclopean twins. So God did this? I asked my grandmother. Yes, sugar, you do understand. I knew you would. She touched the tiny bristles of my flat top. To me, God was no better than Horace Barnett. Murderers. Both of them. Then I hate God, I said. My grandmother gasped and slapped me right across my 8-year-old face, and then she gasped again. She placed her hands on the hood of the Buick and steadied herself. She began to cry. I comforted her for hitting me. I was. She's right. No longer a child.